They called him the Black Napoleon, not because they respected him, but because they had no other way to explain what he was doing to them. For 16 years, 16, one African man kept the most powerful colonial army in West Africa, running, retreating, regrouping, and coming back, only to be outmaneuvered again. He built an empire from nothing. He built an arms factory in the African jungle. He moved an entire nation, millions of people, across hundreds of miles to stay free. And when they finally caught him, he had been fighting since before most of his captors were born. This is the story of Samori Touré, emperor, strategist, father, warrior, the African king who looked at the full force of French colonialism and chose to fight. Welcome back to Echoes of the Ancients, where we resurrect the history they buried. If you watched our last video, 5 African kingdoms Britain feared most, you already know that Africa was never the helpless continent colonizers described. Today we go even deeper, because Samori Touré didn't just resist European colonialism, he made it his life's work, his identity, his legacy, and the story of how he did it will change how you see African history forever. Samori Touré was born around 1830 in Manyambala-Dougou, a small village in the Milo River Valley of what is now the Republic of Guinea. He was not born a king. He was not born into power. He was born the son of a trader, a merchant family who dealt in kola nuts, cloth, and the commerce that kept West Africa moving. Until the age of 20, Samori himself was a trader, moving through markets, learning routes, reading people, understanding geography. That knowledge would save his life and build an empire decades later. But first came the moment that changed everything. In 1853, while Samori was away trading, his mother, Masara Touré, was kidnapped, seized in a raid by the Cissé clan, and taken captive. Most sons would have grieved from a distance. Samori walked into the enemy camp and made an offer: take me instead. He offered himself, his freedom, his body, his future, in exchange for his mother's release. They accepted, and for the next several years, Samori served in the army of the very clan that had stolen his mother. But here is what the Cissé clan didn't understand about the young man they had just acquired. Samori Touré was watching everything. He studied their tactics, their formations, their weapons, their weaknesses. He became one of their finest fighters, not because he was loyal to them, but because he was preparing. When he finally secured his mother's freedom and walked away, he walked away as a military commander in everything but title. By 1861, he was named Keletigi, war commander of his own people. The student had become the general, and the general had a vision. Between 1852 and 1882, Samori Touré did something extraordinary. He took the scattered, fragmented Malinke chiefdoms of West Africa, communities that had long fought each other, and forged them into a single, unified empire. The Wassoulou Empire, at its peak, his territory stretched from what is now Sierra Leone in the west to the borders of modern Mali in the north, to the frontiers of Côte d'Ivoire and Liberia in the south. An empire larger than many European nations at the time, built not by inheritance, but by strategy, diplomacy, negotiation, and when necessary, war. But Samori was not just a conqueror. He was an organizer. He divided his empire into 162 chiefdoms, organized into 10 provinces, each with clear lines of authority, taxation, and administration. He built a professional army, the Sofa Infantry, 30,000 to 35,000 men, uniformed, drilled, disciplined in modern warfare techniques. Alongside them, a cavalry wing, the Serre, 3,000 mounted fighters trained for speed and precision, and then he did something no one expected. He built an arms factory right there in West Africa, in the heart of his empire. Between 300 and 400 skilled craftsmen, African men, manufacturing and repairing modern rifles and weapons to supplement the firearms he was acquiring from British traders in Sierra Leone. Think about what that means. While Europe was telling the world that Africa had no technology, no industry, no innovation, Samori Touré had built a weapons manufacturing operation in the African jungle. That is not primitive. That is genius. By the late 1870s, the French Empire was pushing eastward from Senegal, hungry, aggressive, determined to link their West African territories into one unbroken colonial corridor. Standing directly in their path, the Wassoulou Empire and Samori Touré. In February 1882, French commander Gustave Bourgnis Desbordes sent an envoy to Samori with a message: withdraw from Kenyeran, accept French authority. Samori's response was immediate. He sacked the town. The French relief column arrived too late. They chased Samori's forces and ran directly into his newly perfected guerrilla tactics. Hit and run, ambush and retreat. Divide the enemy column, strike at their supply lines, disappear into the terrain. The French had expected a frontal battle against warriors with spears. Instead, they found a commander who had studied their own tactics and improved on them. Between 1882 and 1885, Samori fought the French across multiple campaigns, winning battles, losing others, never losing the war. When the French tried to seize the Buret goldfields in 1885, Samori divided his army into 3 mobile columns, worked around the French lines of communication, and forced them to withdraw in haste. The New York Times, writing about Samori in 1898 after his capture, described him as, for nearly 13 years, the most dangerous antagonist Europeans had to deal with in West Africa. Let that sink in. The most dangerous, not the most primitive, not the most stubborn, the most dangerous. Because danger requires intelligence, and Samori Touré had it in abundance. Here is where Samori Touré reveals a dimension of brilliance that most history books ignore entirely. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a diplomat. While fighting the French in the West, Samori opened negotiations with the British in Sierra Leone, buying modern repeating rifles and keeping his army armed with the best available weapons. He played France and Britain against each other with the precision of a grandmaster. When the French pressed too hard, he signed treaties, not because he was surrendering, but because every treaty bought him time. Time to rearm, time to reposition, time to think 3 moves ahead. The French signed the Treaty of Kenyeba-Kura with him in 1886. They thought they had contained him. Within 2 years, Samori had used that breathing space to reorganize, rearm, and resume. When French commander Colonel Archinard launched what he believed would be a decisive lightning campaign in 1891, expecting to crush Samori in weeks, he captured Kankan, he captured Bisandugu, Samori's capital. He found them both empty. Samori had moved everything, every weapon, every person, every grain of supplies. The French had captured cities. Samori still had his army. An empty city is just buildings. An intact army is everything. What Samori Touré did next has no parallel in African colonial history. Facing overwhelming French pressure on his western territories, In 1891, he made a decision so bold, so audacious, that military historians still study it today. He moved his entire empire east. Not just his army, his entire nation. Millions of people across hundreds of miles into new territory in what is now Côte d'Ivoire. And as he moved, he deployed the scorched earth. Every village he evacuated, he burned. Every crop field, destroyed. Every well, emptied. Not out of cruelty, out of pure military logic. He was denying the French every resource they would need to pursue him and sustain their advance. Think about what this man was carrying. The weight of an entire people depending on his decisions. Millions of lives on the move through unfamiliar terrain. A shrinking weapons supply as French pressure cut off his trade routes to Sierra Leone. And still, he built a second empire. He established a new capital at Kong in Upper Côte d'Ivoire, consolidated new territories, resumed resistance. The French had spent a decade trying to destroy one empire. Samurai built another one. By 1897, Samurai was fighting on two fronts simultaneously, the French pushing from the west and north, a British force moving from the south. His weapons supply was gone. His allies had fallen one by one. The Kénédougou kingdom of Sikasso fell to France on May 1st, 1898, removing his last major regional ally. His army was exhausted, starving, surrounded. On September 29, 1898, French Captain Henri Gouraud captured Samori Touré in his camp at Guélémou in western Côte d'Ivoire. He had been fighting for 16 years. 16 years of warfare, diplomacy, strategy, sacrifice, and resistance against the industrial might of the French colonial empire. They exiled him to Untold in Gabon, thousands of miles from his people, his land, everything he had built. On June 2, 1900, Samori Touré died of pneumonia. He was approximately 70 years old. He never went home. But here is what France could never exile: his memory, his method, his defiance. Samori Touré became the rallying cry for every anti-colonial movement that followed in Guinea and Mali. Streets, schools, and monuments across West Africa bear his name today. His tomb stands at the Camayan Mausoleum within the gardens of the Grand Mosque of Conakry, Guinea, honored as a national hero. And then, 58 years after his capture, the legacy continued in a way no one could have scripted. In 1958, French President Charles de Gaulle offered every French African territory a choice: join the French community or go it alone without French support. Every territory voted yes. Every territory except one, Guinea, led by Samori's own great-grandson, Ahmed Sékou Touré, who looked at France and said the same word his great-grandfather had said 60 years earlier: no. The blood of resistance doesn't dilute. It concentrates. It carries forward. It finds the next generation and whispers the same instruction: do not surrender. Samori Touré was born a trader's son in a small West African village. He entered enemy captivity at 20 to save his mother. He built an empire that stretched across 4 modern nations. He outfought, outthought, and outlasted the French colonial army for 16 years. He moved an entire nation across hundreds of miles rather than surrender, and when he finally fell, he fell still fighting. The New York Times called him the most dangerous antagonist in West Africa. France called him a problem they could not solve. History calls him exactly what he was: an African emperor who refused to surrender. If this history moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Echoes of the Ancients, where every week we bring back the history they tried to bury, and drop in the comments What hits you hardest about Samori's story? Because this man deserves to be remembered.